Biden's presidential candidacy appears to be in a precarious position as some Democratic lawmakers and leaders are not fully committed to backing him through to Election Day. This fallout comes after his widely criticized performance at the first presidential debate with former President Donald Trump. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let's bring in our political panel, Joel Payne and Kevin Sheridan. Joel is a CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist, and chief communications officer for Move On. And Kevin is the former spokesperson for the Republican National Committee and was a senior advisor for the Romney-Ryan campaign. Good to see you guys on a non-Friday strat chat that we're having. Joel, I'm going to start with you. So we've seen President Biden in the last few days, after the campaign, try to reach out to all sorts of people, certainly other lawmakers. He's meeting with union leaders now. A lot of people have said what he really needs to do, though, is present himself in less formal environments, speaking more off the cuff, get away from that teleprompter. As you're watching him try to sort of make up for the debate performance, do you feel like he's doing enough?
I think it's clear that this week the president and his team certainly changed tactics a bit, both in terms of strategically how they're going about salvaging his candidacy, but also just the way that the president has been going about communicating, even calling into shows. He's done it a few times this week. Who does that sound like? That sounds like the guy he's running against. And also just the way he's really targeted his advocacy to his congressional colleagues, focusing on the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. It's pretty clear that the president's team knew they needed to move with urgency. But, Anne-Marie, I would compare what we're watching right now. This is a high-stakes family discussion within the Democratic Party, and it's mostly among elected officials. The voters, by and large, have spoken. They voted for Joe Biden, albeit in a less competitive primary. So in terms of where the votes are and who owns the delegates, that's Joe Biden. But right now you have party elders and party leaders trying to discuss whether or not there's really a path forward for President Biden. I'd say the likeliest scenario is for Joe Biden to remain a nominee, but it would be unwise to make a declaration right now because the situation is still very fluid.
What do you think of his characterization of that those who are concerned about his ability to lead are sort of party elites, or maybe it's kind of dismissing the deep pocket donors as elites?
I think that's an incomplete picture that's being told, in part because we know from public opinion polling, there are many voters who have concerns about President Biden's age. There are many people who are going to vote for Joe Biden who have concerns about his age. Folks who consider themselves Biden partisans, who think that Joe Biden is too old to serve. So I think it's a bit dismissive. And I do think you have maybe seen a bit more of a nuanced messaging from the Biden team, not necessarily leaning as much into that and more into the fact that he's committed to the race, demonstrating that he can do the job. I think we're entering a really important stretch over the next day or two with this NATO meeting, with this press conference tomorrow. And I think by the end of this weekend, a lot of Democrats expect to have more clarity on what happens next.
All right, Kevin, let's talk about the other guy. Donald Trump, uncharacteristically silent for a number of days, and then finally he holds a rally down in Florida. He challenges Biden to another debate, but this time no moderators. It sounded so much like, promotion for a wrestling match, but let's play some of what it is.
They want Crooked Joe out of the race. It's a shame the way they're treating him. But don't feel sorry for him. He's a very bad guy. So tonight I'm officially offering Joe the chance to redeem himself in front of the entire world. Let's do another debate this week so that Sleepy Joe Biden can prove to everyone all over the world that he has what it takes to be president. But this time it will be man to man, no moderators, no holes barred.
No holds barred. We'll sell you the seat, but you'll only need the edge. Let's talk a little bit about Trump's kind of approach. I thought it was curious that he did not have any other sort of campaign events until this one. What do you make of it?
Yeah, he's driving the Biden campaign and Democrats crazy by not stepping into the mix right now and just letting Joe Biden and all the drama around the campaign and within the Democratic House and Senate caucuses and voters' concerns that Joe Biden is just too old and this is only going to get worse. And we've all seen how aging works, our parents and our grandparents, and this is not going to get better. So if he stays quiet, he also challenged Joe Biden to a round of golf and spotted him 20 strokes. So he's feeling extremely confident right now. If he were to just go golf for the next 118 days, he would probably cruise to victory. So he should just, I think, keep his head as low as he can. That's a relative term for Donald Trump. But so far, this campaign has showed a lot of discipline.
So let me say this, though, Kevin. I know there's a lot of attention on Biden and his age, but Donald Trump really didn't do all that great in the debate either. We already went over that already, his non-answers to questions and things that were just, not correct. Maybe his presentation is looking better than Joe Biden, but voters can see that both of these men are flawed in many, many ways. There's still not a lot of enthusiasm, even for Donald Trump. What's it going to take because before it was like younger voters weren't that interested in these two old guys, but now even baby boomers are kind of over this.
Yeah, he could signal, I guess, the direction of how he's going to take his presidency with a presidential pick that plays to the suburbs or plays to the minority vote that he's trying to make inroads in. We've got the convention coming up next week that takes the spotlight off of Joe Biden for a moment, but the enthusiasm is within the Republican base, obviously. But what Donald Trump is now doing is trying to pivot, I think, towards the middle. We didn't see that in 2016 or 2020, but he's actually making inroads, I think, in the suburbs with minority voters. Look at the RNC platform. It's the most moderate platform of my lifetime. So he's got the values voters locked up, so he doesn't need to play to them. He's got, he's being very moderate on virtually everything. The gun message wasn't even intense. So he's making a play for non-traditional Republican voters because Joe Biden's leaving the field open.
That's really interesting. We have run out of time, but I feel like Kevin and Joel, that's something that we definitely do have to discuss is the platform that's been unveiled, and Project 2025. We'll have those conversations. Thank you so much, gentlemen.